This panel is going to be a sort of hybrid panel, but I think we'll get a very, very interesting conversation going. We're going to start we'll start the conversation with a focus on natural gas, where we are with natural gas supplies, what the outlook is. That's Peter. Yes. Well, we didn't hear the details yet. That's Peter Robertson from America's Natural Gas Alliance, which is an organization which represents really the biggest independent natural gas exploration and development companies. He's going to be followed by Gal. Gal Luft is my colleague at IAGS, Institute for Analysis of Global Security, and I'll take this opportunity to really explain the Institute to you, for those of you that aren't familiar and didn't hear earlier today. The Institute for Analysis of Global Security is a think tank, a nonprofit think tank, focused on energy security writ large. We have a journal that you're all welcome to, an online journal that is no charge. You're all welcome to subscribe to it. It's very, very informative. We run many different projects related to different aspects of the energy security picture. The United States Energy Security Council, co-founded by Bud McFarlane and Jim Woolsey, is a project of the Institute. We're very proud of the work the Council has been doing. There are many other projects I won't get into really across the space of energy security that we deal with. But let me continue introducing our speakers. Vikram. Oh, I didn't finish introducing you, Gal. No, is it enough, right? Everybody heard who Gal is earlier today when he was a moderator. So Vikram was the CTO of Halliburton, which I think is one of the very interesting points in your bio. In addition to the fact that he's right now executive director of the Research Triangle Institute in North Carolina, which is really an institute that is comprised of the several universities down in that area, and obviously does a great deal of work and focus on energy issues and has some very interesting things to tell us about methanol. After that, we are going to shift to a more general conversation of what's going on the Hill. And two of my colleagues and friends, yes, friends, Amit Ronen and Neil Brown. Amit, who Neil told me to introduce you first since you're in the majority. And you get to go before him too. Amit is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Senator Cantwell. We've been working together for years. Amit and the Senator really have been on the cutting edge in terms of focus on this issue, I think from a non-parochial point of view at all, just from a national interest point of view, really across the spectrum in terms of energy security, and Neil and Senator Lugar are in the same position. It's very rare where you have senators that are absolutely looking at this issue from the lens of the national interest and across broad swaths of this issue. Neil, I'm going to do a little pitch for your newsletter. You don't mind, right? Neil issues a newsletter periodically on energy security issues of interest, so you may want to come up to him and put your name on that list. But without further ado, we're going to get started. Peter, you're going to go first, and you want to speak from the podium? So let's move on right along.
Thanks to all of you for coming. I'm really delighted to have a few minutes this afternoon to talk a little bit about natural gas and some of what we see on the horizon for natural gas. ANGA is a trade association of 30 of the largest independent natural gas exploration and production companies in America. My member companies produce about 40% of the natural gas that's produced in the United States, and it's a higher percentage if you're just talking about the shale gas that is changing the energy future of our country. abundant natural gas is really helping to reinvigorate, to reindustrialize the United States. It's reinvigorating domestic industries that had moved offshore when prices were high, and it's also helping make some industries more competitive, like the steel industry, for example, which has seen its costs reduced because of low-cost natural gas. We're excited about the role that natural gas can play in transportation as well. One way is through natural gas vehicles, obviously. Another is through the production of fuels, such as methanol, that are made from natural gas. If low-cost domestic natural gas is going to be available to be used itself as a transportation fuel, to be used as a feedstock for other transportation fuels, obviously if it's going to be available to be used for anything, the industry has to ensure the supply of natural gas at a reasonable price remains abundant. We do that by ensuring that the demand remains consistent, doing what we can to ensure that demand remains consistent, as well as by addressing the issues surrounding the environmental sustainability of natural gas production so that we can maintain the trust of regulators and of the general public. The abundance of natural gas is really what's made it a game changer for the U.S. energy economy. That abundance is due to the combination of two technologies, horizontal or so-called directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing. The combination of those two technologies is what has given us access to natural gas in deep shale layers, a mile or more below the surface of the earth, which we have not previously been able to access with conventional drilling techniques. How much gas do we have? The amount is truly extraordinary. The Energy Information Administration's most recent annual energy outlook estimates that we have 2.2 quadrillion cubic feet of natural gas. That's about a 93-year supply at current rates of consumption. And the EIA estimates have consistently grown over the past several years, and I would expect them to continue to grow as we learn more about some of the shale plays that haven't been as extensively explored, shale plays like the Antrim Shale in Michigan or the Utica Shale in Ohio. But production of natural gas, especially if shale gas is booming, we produced some 21 trillion cubic feet in 2010. And by 2035, EIA estimates that that figure will grow to about 28 trillion cubic feet. Of those many trillions of cubic feet, 23% of it comes today from shale gas. But by 2035, EIA estimates that that figure will grow to nearly 50%. IHS-CERA, one of the most well-respected energy consulting firms in the world, estimates that that figure will be close to 60%. So the type of shale gas the type of gas that my members are busily engaged in producing today is going to become even more important to America's energy economy in the future. To help bring home how the abundance of this domestic fuel differs from the past, let me point out that it was only 2007, hello Joe, it was only 2007 when EIA had a forecast that anticipated that the U.S. demand for natural gas would be met by importing increasing amounts of liquefied natural gas from abroad. Specifically, LNG imports were estimated to be 10% by 2020 and growing to 25% by 2025. Today, the data for 2010 indicates that LNG imports were only about 2% of our total natural gas consumption in 2010, while domestic production has far exceeded those earlier forecasts. One of the significant benefits of this abundance of natural gas for the end users is the historically low prices that we see today. Natural gas prices haven't exceeded $6.10 per million BTU since January of 2009. The 2010 average price was about $4.38. The 2011 average price had dropped to about $4.03. Recent gas prices have been extraordinarily low, below $4 since the middle of September, and of course now are hovering around $2.25 a million BTU. As I mentioned, abundant supply and low prices brings benefit to the natural gas consumers, indeed to our entire economy. IHS-CERA, in a study that they performed for us in December of last year, found the following. In 2010, natural gas just shale gas production was responsible for 600,000 jobs in the United States. They expect that figure to grow to 1.6 million jobs by 2035. Without shale gas production, natural gas prices would double because we'd have to import more LNG from abroad. By 2017, lower natural gas prices are going to increase industrial production by 2.9%. By 2035, industrial production will be 4.7% higher. And the savings from lower natural gas prices will add an annual average of $926 per year in disposable household income for every family in America. By 2035, that figure will grow to just over $2,000 per household. Now, ANGA's priorities for increasing demand for natural gas are targeted on power generation, on transportation, and on industrial use. Natural gas-powered power plants currently make up the greatest portion of our generation capacity in the United States, yet only about a quarter of that capacity is actually used. So we think natural gas for power generation is underused right now. Low-priced natural gas supplies, coupled with power plant infrastructure already in place around the U.S., is facilitating expanded power sector use of natural gas, which did increase more than 25% between 2005 and 2010. Continuing to expand power sector use also has an immediate and a significant benefit for our environment. The Congressional Research Service found that if we doubled the use of natural gas combined cycle plants, nearly 10% of all U.S. carbon emissions would be offset. And of course, that doesn't even take into consideration the reductions in so-called criteria pollutants like mercury and SOx and NOx and particulate matter. The transportation sector is also benefiting from natural gas's new abundance in the United States. The gas-producing companies that are part of ANGA have been driving change in many of the same locations where they're producing natural gas. These companies are building refueling facilities for natural gas, they're buying and using their own natural gas vehicles, and they're financing new technologies for natural gas vehicles as well. The use of natural gas for fleet vehicles has been expanding rapidly. In Los Angeles, the local metro system retired their last diesel bus in January of 2011. And now they have more than 2,000 compressed natural gas buses, which is more than 99% of their fleet. In addition, commercial use of natural gas vehicle fleets is rising, notably among companies like UPS and AT&T. As I noted previously, while we're excited about natural gas vehicles, we're similarly excited about the potential for natural gas to be used to produce other viable transportation fuels such as methanol. I mentioned previously how natural gas is aiding the reindustrialization of the United States. There are clear examples of this already in America's steel and chemical industries, just to cite two examples. The steel industry is seeing increased orders for specialty pipes because of the drilling associated with the shale gas boom, and they're also seeing lower production costs because of inexpensive natural gas. The Dow Chemical Company will spend about $4 billion to construct a cracker plant near the Gulf Coast by 2017. They're going to reopen another one in Louisiana, and they're going to build 2 propylene plants. That $4 billion investment will supply ingredients for Dow plants that make high-margin products, such as automotive plastics and paint additives. And as this audience knows better than anyone, one of natural gas's most important uses has been as a feedstock to produce methanol. But North American methanol production disappeared in favor of cheaper production in other countries. That trend, happily, has reversed. We're seeing methanol plants reopening from Medicine Hat, Alberta, to Texas and Louisiana. And the explanation for this increased activity is obviously low-cost natural gas. Now, I mentioned that the industry has some challenges, too, and I want to talk for just a minute about those as well, especially about the concerns regarding the environmental sustainability of natural gas production. One of the things that I'm proud of my trade association for doing is a statement that we make in our advertising. I hope you've seen some of our national ads on television. If not, we're wasting an extraordinary amount of money. In those advertisements, we say that natural gas production does come with some risks. Every form of energy production comes with risks, obviously. We think that the appropriate follow-on to that statement is, are the risks being appropriately managed, and are the benefits worth the risk? And we think the answer to both of those questions is a resounding yes. the industry's track record over the last 60 years of hydraulic fracturing supports that notion. But the white-hot core of the hydraulic fracturing debate these days is the issue about the disclosure of the content of hydraulic fracturing fluids. The industry has moved out aggressively on that point, and ANGA has been an important part of that effort. The Groundwater Protection Council, which is a trade association for state government agencies charged with protecting the quality of groundwater, started a website called fracfocus.org. The GWPC set it up so that natural gas companies, like my member companies, could post online the content of their hydraulic fracturing fluids on a well-by-well basis. It was started as a voluntary effort, yet it's been a resounding success. The website has only been up for about a year, less than a year actually, and there are already at least 13,000 wells available online on that site. Now, while FracFocus is a voluntary effort, the site's been adopted by several states as the compliance mechanism for their mandatory disclosure requirements. For example, Texas required disclosure of the content of hydraulic fracturing fluids as of the beginning of February, and is allowing companies to disclose that information through FracFocus. Because of this, FracFocus saw the biggest jump in the number of wells disclosed on the site that it's seen in the year that it's been up. Montana and other states are moving in the same direction, and I think that's going to make that snowball continue to roll downhill and pick up size and pick up speed to the benefit of the public that's interested in the content of hydraulic fracturing fluids. Beyond disclosure, there is concern, though, unwarranted concern, we believe, that hydraulic fracturing may lead to contamination of underground sources of water. This excitement is to a large degree incited by the relatively fact-free discussion revolving hydraulic fracturing that you see in movies like Gasland. If you haven't seen that movie, the most dramatic scene in the entire movie is when a landowner lights his faucet on fire. It's extraordinarily dramatic. And of course, the suggestion is that it's because of natural gas production near his home that he has methane in his water. The fact of the matter is, and the filmmaker knew this because we told him before he made the film, that that landowner had drilled his water well into a low-lying, naturally occurring bed of methane. Now, if you do that, yes, I can promise you, you're going to get methane in your water, and you're going to be able to amaze your friends by lighting your tap water on fire. But it has nothing to do with natural gas production, and the Colorado state regulatory authorities confirmed that fact. But concern continues nonetheless about whether hydraulic fracturing contaminates groundwater, and quite legitimate questions are being asked about whether our wastewaters are being handled appropriately when we bring them to the surface. Concerns are expressed about the volumes of water that we use, and as well about the size of the surface area that we disturb. As I mentioned previously, hydraulic fracturing isn't new. The oil and gas industry has been doing it safely and successfully for more than 60 years. We have fracked well over 1 million wells, and Lisa Jackson, the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, has testified before Congress that they cannot conclusively point to a single well having contaminated underground sources of water. Indeed, my sense, though, of why we're facing these continuing concerns, expressions of concern about hydraulic fracturing, is simply the scope of drilling that's being brought about by the shale gas boom. We're now drilling at a rate that we haven't seen previously in the United States, and perhaps more importantly, we're doing it in places that haven't seen a lot of natural resource extraction previously. Pennsylvania isn't Oklahoma and Texas. Pennsylvanians haven't seen natural resource extraction like they're seeing now in their lifetimes, so it's understandable that they're concerned. But if you look at our record, if you look at the oversight put in place by the federal and state governments, if you look at the innovative practices that we have underway, we firmly believe that the facts are on our side and that we have a compelling tale to take to the American people. From recycling water used in fracking, to using more clean natural gas in our own operations, to employing greener chemistry, our companies are always pursuing innovations that can further reduce their environmental impact. Horizontal drilling significantly reduces the environmental impact of production by allowing more access to more natural gas below the ground with less surface disturbance and with a smaller number of wells. The average well site today is just 30% of the size of its 1970s counterpart. Half as many wells are needed to produce the same amount of gas as we were producing 20 years ago. Shale gas development typically involves drilling a mile or more below the ground. The well is lined with several layers of steel encased in cement to completely seal off the process, and the dense shale rock that exists between the fracking site and the underground sources of water is another natural barrier that helps to protect the quality of the groundwater. Well integrity tests are conducted before any fracking fluids are put downhole. Like virtually all forms of energy, substantial volumes of water are required in the development of natural gas. We certainly don't suggest anything to the contrary. We're continually exploring approaches that reduce the amount of water required, that recycle water that returns to the surface, and that uses non-potable sources of water to do fracking, like municipal wastewater or non-potable underground briny sources of water, for example. Now, while fracturing does require a lot of water, between 3 to 5 million gallons of water to frack a well, that volume is actually a relatively small amount of water compared to the amount continually required to generate power from most other energy sources. In fact, a study by Harvard's Belfer Center of Science and International Affairs concluded that because natural gas power plants use so much less water than other types of power plants, cultivation of shale gas resources would actually lead to less water use. Now, those facts don't create as dynamic a picture as lighting a faucet on fire. So ANGA just has to keep repeating those facts until they break through with the public. That's one of ANGA's jobs, and I guarantee you it's one we take seriously, and I appreciate the opportunity to repeat them before you today, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you all very much. Did we change the slides? Okay, Peter, one of your members, I think, defined it correctly. Audrey McClendon said, our problem with natural gas is not that it's oversupplied, it's under-demanded. And what we need to think about is how do we create demand quickly, because if we don't, this natural gas will leave the country in the form of LNG. Not that it's anything wrong with that, but I think this natural gas could stay here and do a lot of good to our economy, particularly when you're talking about replacing $100 or $200 a barrel worth of oil. So what I would like to talk about is how do we use natural gas to reduce oil dependency? What are the options? How do we... Is that supposed to change it? Yeah. There we are. Okay, so of course natural gas goes into electricity, chemicals, and transportation fuels, and the methanol is basically the nexus between chemicals and transportation because it can be used for both. Is that supposed to work, or is it just, yeah, just click it? Next slide. Okay. All right, so there are a number of ways of using natural gas for transportation, and basically three categories that I want to talk about. One is the energy carriers, the electricity and the hydrogen. So when you drive your car on electricity, essentially, to a certain extent, you drive it on natural gas. Same goes for hydrogen. Then there are what we call the drop-in fuels, the diesel and the gasoline, that can also be made from natural gas. It's slightly more complicated and sometimes more expensive, but it's doable. And the advantage there is that you really don't need to change anything in the car because, no, I will tell you when to change. And the blue ones are the ones that I want to focus on today, which are the two options, basically methanol versus what we call CNG car, compressed natural gas. So we have essentially two ways of doing it. To those of you who don't know, methanol, I'm sure everybody is aware of. We discussed it all day today. CNG is basically, you basically have a compressed gas canister in the trunk of your car.
and either a dedicated fuel line for natural gas, if it's a dual fuel or a single fuel, depending on the technology. But we're going to do a quick comparison of those two approaches and see what are the pros and cons of each of them, and then maybe we'll come to some conclusions. So let's start with the platform cost, because I think, like a lot of technologies, barrier to penetration is in the cost of the platform. I mean, probably a lot of us would be driving electric vehicles today if not for the fact that the battery cost $10,000. So the same is true for a CNG vehicle. I'm talking about light-duty vehicles here. So if you just take, for example, the Honda Civic GX, currently the car that offered by the OEMs today, sticker price at $26,000. If you compare it to a regular standard version of a Civic, $10,000 difference. So considerable difference to the cost of the platform. When you talk about a flexible fuel vehicle, as we know, much lower, various estimates, but certainly around $100, $200, not like the thousands of dollars that we're talking about CNG. Refueling infrastructure, again, CNG here has significant disadvantage vis-a-vis the liquid fuel approach. We're talking about very steep cost for installation of refueling system at the station. You could have a home refueling system, but that too is several $1,000s depending on the system. When it comes to liquids, we see that the difference is significant. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars, whether it is a retrofit or a new storage tank, something that is much more manageable cost-wise. When it comes to the cost of the fuel, here CNG has a significant cost advantage over methanol. It is cheaper, and then we have to look at the entire cost of ownership when you add up the platform cost, the fuel cost over a period of time of 10 years. We see that because of the cost of the platform, CNG is significantly a more expensive option for a light-duty vehicle than the methanol approach. Now, I want to add here that that is true for the United States. In many parts of the world, if you go to places like Argentina or Pakistan or Iran, you see that CNG vehicles are very, very cheap and affordable, and there are almost most of the 13 million CNG cars that are around the world are in those countries. And the reason is that in those countries they use Type 1 canisters, which are made from steel, and as opposed to the Type 4 canisters that we use in the United States that are made from more advanced materials. There are also costs related to certification and all kind of safety measures and higher standards of safety, but nevertheless, it is what it is. And I have looked at a number of reports that suggest that with mass production, the cost of the platform could come down significantly, but it's hard to tell at what point this cost reduction will kick in. As for refueling time and convenience, CNG, well, that depends on whether you refuel at the station or at home, but let's call it a wash. Greenhouse gas emissions here, CNG has an advantage over methanol when it's made from gas. That's NRDC, so look, if I used your numbers here, so feel free to jump in if they're not correct. But however, when you think about methanol more broadly or alcohol more broadly, when you have flexible fuel vehicles and you use the other alcohols, you can have feedstocks or types of alcohol that promise a better reduction in greenhouse gas emissions than CNG. For example, with cellulosic ethanol, you have a 90% reduction. With sugarcane ethanol, 56% reduction. So what the when we think about the methanol option, we need to think about the flex fuel option and realize that there could be other fuels that could have significant greenhouse gas reduction properties. And even if you think about methanol from biomass, here you can see also a significant reduction in greenhouse gas, twice as much as with CNG. When it comes to convenience, the only thing that I would say about CNG is if you want to, I don't know how your golf clubs would fit in the trunk or things like this, or, I know that Newt Gingrich is worried about a gun rack. I don't know, you can put a gun rack in the trunk of your CNG. I haven't tested it, but that's about the main issue that I think I could think about. Range. Here we're talking about range compromise in both options. We talked about the methanol issue with range, but there is also a range sacrifice when it comes to CNG, so we can call this a wash too. Energy security, again, with CNG, unless it's a dual fuel car, you basically move from a one fuel car to a one fuel car, whereas with methanol FFE, you move from a one fuel car to a full fuel flexibility, because as I said, it's not only methanol that can run, it's also ethanol from a variety of feedstocks and gasoline, of course. So you can have more options, and that means better energy security. Safety, well, methanol is toxic, as has been mentioned, so please don't drink it. But there are other factors related to safety in which methanol has a positive impact, particularly as Greg mentioned before. It's harder to ignite. There's less risk of car fire. The EPA has some good studies on this. And when it comes to CNG, again, relatively safe unless it goes on fire, and then there is a problem. But I don't think any car would be safe when it goes up in flames. So let's summarize here. Now, when you look at the 10 factors, the 10 criteria, we see that methanol has some significant advantages vis-a-vis CNG. What we see is that, again, CNG has significant advantage in terms of fuel cost and greenhouse gas emissions, assuming that you only use methanol. But overall, and that's the point I want to leave you with, is that there are many advantages that the flex fuel approach has, particularly when it comes to market penetration and deployment of the new platforms, when we know that in order for customers to buy those cars, there would be a need for tax incentives. And I think one of the reasons that the nat gas bill was not able to move the way that some in the industry had expected is because it was very hefty in terms of the tax incentives, and we have a Congress today that in the era of fiscal tightness, it is much less likely that we can move policy that entails tens of thousands of dollars of tax credits per car. So I think, and I leave it to the political folks to talk about this, about the mood in Congress, but I think that at the very least, we need to make sure that if we are talking about, when we talk about the need to use natural gas in transportation, we have all the options open, and we have policy that does not pick one specific technology, but one that really opens the door to all of the pathways in which natural gas can play a role in transportation. And that I think is a good segue to talk about the open fuel standard and how the open fuel standard might achieve this goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Is the table mic? Can you turn on the table mic, please?
Well, actually, let me get up because they can't see. This
Yeah.
podium is tall. I'll get up here. Don't put the slide on yet. Let me make, I'm going to keep this short because I was added, therefore I'm not in the printed program. And so I'll keep it short, but we can have questions and answers, of course. So I'm going to speak to 2 points. One is to what's viable methanol need. What it needs is 2 things, supply and reasonable cost. On supply, if you take natural gas as the primary raw material that you use, and it does not have to be. In Q&A, we can discuss the types of coals and what the difference it makes, which one you use, and so forth. But right now, I'll limit myself to natural gas and say we've got lots of it, and therefore supply is not going to be an issue. So let's talk about cost. And for cost, I'm going to show you just one slide, by the way, just one entire slide. I'm going to show you, as a part of that slide, a projection of what the cost is likely to be of natural gas. And I'm going to tell you that the price of natural gas will be in a tight band between about $4 a million BTU and about $6.50 a million BTU, roughly. Okay. I'm going to tell you that I expect a cap around 8, a ceiling, I'll call it. There's not a real cap. And I'm not going to give you the model. That'll get published elsewhere. But I will show you support from 2 other areas. One is Amy Jaffe and colleagues at Baker Institute in Houston have published a 3 scenarios, and every one of the scenarios over 3 decades, they give a projection of price. Now, these are decadal averages, so they don't show spikes. But one thing about shale gas is you won't get spikes. We'll come back to that in Q&A if you want. And so Amy Jaffe and her colleagues pretty much support a number. In fact, she doesn't go over 6 in any of her scenarios. And then you saw the Wood-Mackenzie data this morning, which only goes out to 2020, I think. But I saw that, if I remember correctly, visually, I think it just goes to $5.50, I think, at most. Now, I don't know where they got it, but they're a reputable organization. So, and they support my numbers, so they're good. So I'm suggesting that it'll be between 4. By the way, don't believe this 225 and 230 right now. This is an aberration due to the hot winter, non-cold winter. Don't get used to it, you methanol producers. And when I show you the chart, you will see why methanol producers are ecstatic at this time. Okay, so right now we go to the chart, if it comes on. Chart? Yeah, okay. Single chart. So what we have on the vertical axis is the production cost of methanol. This is cost. There's no profit in this. This is production cost in US dollars per US gallon. On the horizontal axis is natural gas price in dollars per million BTU. And these are hard numbers. These are verified with major producers of equipment, and these are hard numbers. This is, again, cost. Now, notice what it is today, in March 2012. Actually, I've got it a little more than it even is. And if you go to the right, left, you will see that methanol can be produced for 37 cents. Okay, you notice it's being sold for $1.13. Okay, hence the ecstasy in the and the point that was made earlier that cost is fine. Eventually, the market decides what the price is, and so and properly address that in our summary comment. So let's not go there. But I'm going to tell you what it costs. And so you can see with the cost in October 2010, which is basically the average of that year, roughly about $4, as Peter pointed out earlier too. And so for that sort of figure, which is what you probably will have for several years out from now, okay? It'll probably be somewhere around there, unless demand really kicks in. So then you add 50 cents. Okay, so now where does it go from there? First you had to add a profit, but in that, who knows what that is? They probably deserve 15%. So let's say it's 15%. So on the 50 cents, 15%, 7.5 cents, they might get more, of course. They're getting more now. I'm saying they deserve 15. It goes to 52, 53, and to that you add 10 cents of distribution, add 20 cents for federal and local taxes. Now, state taxes differ all over the country, so I'm not going into that. But let's say you add 30 cents. So from somewhere around 60 plus 30, 90 cents. Okay, buck. I don't care. Okay, you see what we're talking about. Now we look at the top line, which is my forecasted maximum price. And this is based on some stuff, it's probably even right. So it's around, it'll be around 80-something cents. So add to that profit and add to that 30 cents, so it comes to 90 plus 30, 120 or something. Now this is purely the cost of methanol. Now you put any multiplier you want. You know, I used to put a multiplier of 2 to get to gasoline, and then we heard recently that it should probably be more like 1.6 or 1.7. Be my guest. These are the methanol numbers. Okay, so what are these numbers for? So here we are. So what this is appearing to say is that for any expectation of US pricing, this is US pricing. Gas is twice this in Europe and 3 times this in India and Asia, in Japan. Okay, so again, we're talking US here. For US, by the way, in those countries, coal would be much more, but we won't go there for the moment, for methanol production. If you look at any reasonable projection of natural gas pricing, methanol flat out is going to be highly, highly competitive with gasoline. And then, of course, this is gasoline at $100 a barrel, and it's not going to be $100. And the other really key point is this. Oil tends to go up and down based upon a lot of things. Natural gas in the US now, because of shale gas, is going to be stable as heck. You're not going to see the spikes that we saw before. And this is why the chemical industry is coming back. And then one last final point, then I'm going to sit and as to what these numbers are on. These numbers are for 5 metric tons a day, for those who care. 5 metric tons a day type of plant, which is a very standard size plant, although the Chinese are putting 10 metric tons a day plant, which is about, so 5 metric tons a day, if I remember correctly, I tried to do it last night on an envelope, I think it's about 40,000 barrels per day. But this is methanol, this is not gasoline. And so this is pretty much a standard size plant. In other words, there's no projection issues here. This is what it'll cost to do it, as long as I'm right about the gas price. And that's the end of my unprepared remarks. Thank you.
Can I have the mic on? Okay. Amit, you want to speak from the podium?
Sure.
Yeah, before that, I have to say one thing, which somehow I neglected to mention in the introduction. Of course, you heard a lot of positive things and a lot of support for the open fuel standard in the earlier sessions this morning and during lunch as well. Senator Cantwell and Senator Lugar are leading the charge on the open fuel standard in the Senate. And with that, take it away, Amit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me today to speak on behalf of Senator Cantwell. I'm happy to be here with my bipartisan partner, Neil Brown from Senator Lugar's staff. As was just mentioned, we do have a bill together on the open fuel standard. There's a companion bill in the House that's fairly similar. And this is something our bosses, coming from, I think, pretty different perspectives, have been trying to do for a while. But at the heart of it, it's the same thing. We're both worried about that our country is too dependent on oil, and that has a lot of negative consequences in many different aspects. And so we've been trying to essentially provide the capability. How do we get alternatives into a fuel system that is dominated and doesn't have any alternatives to petroleum products right now? So it's been a flex fuel vehicle mandate in the past. Now we're calling it the open fuel standard. And this is actually something my boss was able to do 5 years ago. We passed this out of the Senate. It was an amendment to the CAFE bill, the fuel economy standards. That was the authorization language back then. They're providing great benefits to our country now. We're actually going to be, if the president's current proposal is approved, we're going to be almost at 55 miles per gallon by 2025, something a few years ago people thought was unheard of. That's a very important part of the solution set that we're trying to get to, but we still are very heavily dependent on petroleum, of course. So we passed it out of the Senate, but what happened was that we have some opposition. The opposition comes in various forms, but at the heart of it, it's automaker opposition to doing this, and they were able to kill our proposal that was in the Senate passed version of the 2007 energy bill before it became law. But what's different now? from 2007. Why do we think we're going to be more successful? Well, there's a couple things going on, and some of it's been discussed up here today. And I'd say the number one issue, of course, is high gas prices. High gas prices are here, they're hurting, and they're going to be, there's pretty unlikely, unless we have another major recession, going to be coming down anytime soon. So that makes it more urgent for alternatives, makes alternative fuels more competitive. There's also the volatility issue. As Dr. Rao just mentioned, natural gas prices, if you're looking at the methanol part of the equation as the opportunity for an alternative, are going to be much more stable. The volatility in oil is probably going to continue for a while, but on a generally upward trajectory is what we see. We see the competition that you could provide from alternative fuels as being very helpful to the marketplace. We look to Brazil as an example of that, where ethanol and gasoline effectively compete against each other. If one goes higher, then consumers, because they have the vehicle capability to use alternatives, they go to the cheaper one whenever is necessary and productive and beneficial for their own use. The other big thing, of course, Peter mentioned and others, we have this huge natural gas bounty that's come online. In 2007, you mentioned that we were looking at importing LNG because no one thought about this incredible new source that we have coming online. So while we were working on this in 2007, it wasn't in the context of this natural gas bounty that we're seeing. And that is bringing a lot more people to think about, well, we have all this new potential energy source, but there's still that disconnect between our transportation system and that new resource coming online. Another continuing ongoing thing, and Neil focuses on this a lot, but of course there's a foreign oil threat. While our overall national dependence is going down, for the first time it's probably under 50%. That's still 50% of our oil coming from, as we use more and more of our world's resources coming from a smaller set of countries, and most of them don't like us. And there's always a threat of an oil spike, a supply shock, all sorts of things on the horizon that you could easily imagine vis-a-vis Iran if they want to do something on shutting down the Straits of Hormuz, where 1/5 of the world's oil comes through. That's going to be very harmful to our economy and to our consumers. And there's also ongoing environmental issues, which are important to my boss. We're looking at ways, this was going back to 2007 and earlier, what are better ways, more environmentally friendly alternative fuels that we can use that are better for the environment and particularly lower greenhouse gas emissions. And the one other thing I want to mention that's important now, I think we have, that's different from 2007, is that we have a growing bipartisan support. There's a lot more evidence than that than just us two being here on the panel today. You had a pretty good panel at lunch, which you saw quite a bit of diversity from senior officials from previous administrations, Democratic and Republican. If you look at the House bill on this, it has a very diverse co-sponsorship list that goes completely across the political spectrum that is quite noteworthy for people like us who look at the Hill and try and think about how to build coalitions to get something like this enacted. But all that being said, I still think we have some problems here. We know, because particularly we know this from personal conversations, but it became public when Senator Cantwell and Lugar offered this bill as an amendment to the recent transportation bill in the House, which passed the Senate. But at that time, we got letters of support from a diverse coalition, and we are thankful for that, including many of you in this room here. But we also got a strong letter of opposition from the automakers, so that source of conflict is still there. There were other people that they were able to agree to join them on the letter. There's particularly from last year and last couple of years, but it came to a head last year. They're very strong opposition to corn-based ethanol that's in the Hill. And a lot of that had to do with taking away credits and also people have the belief that corn-based ethanol had raised food prices and feedstock prices, so people like grocery store manufacturers and people who grow livestock, they had grown into the strong coalition against corn-based ethanol, but it had bled to almost all biofuels. And some people believe our proposal is aimed at like furthering, I don't know, I can't speak for them, but the point here is that we need to, a lot more education needs to happen, that this is not a mandate for more corn-based ethanol. It's actually not a mandate for methanol either. It's a mandate for making cars that are able to use whole bunches of different fuels, and that's going to be good for consumers because it's going to give them choice. So that is part of the education, I think, also is methanol is very new on the scene, not to you guys, of course, but up on the Hill. And this was part of the discussion we had with Senator Lugar's office, too. People haven't focused on methanol. It's never been in sort of the solution set that people on the Hill have talked about or looked at. And I think there's not even the appreciation that this is a possibility, that, hey, did you know that you can get methanol out there on equivalency basis is probably about $3 a gallon. I mean, if you tell most senators that, they're like, and it's made domestically, I think it's a pleasant surprise for them, and they want to know how to do it. And you say, well, there's, it's $100 a car. That usually is a pretty compelling argument, but we have to be making that a lot more. There's also the other part of the education is a lot about what Gal talked about, that there's other ideas for what we can do in terms of using this natural gas to try and drive some alternatives to petroleum in our transportation fleet. There's a pretty strong coalition that's looking at compressed natural gas, the Natural Gas Act that we had a vote recently in the Senate. It got 51 votes, which was probably short of the what some of the advocates had been hoped for, given they have some notable bipartisan co-sponsors, including our majority leader and others. And it used to be more popular last Congress before there was a bit of a backlash to it. But that's not the last you've seen of that bill. It's probably going to come around, and we think it's helpful to talk about maybe this isn't the best way to use this natural gas, or if you want to do that, okay, but let's not forget about this way as well, which is going to help all consumers, we feel, with that competition at the fuel pump is going to lower all gas prices. It's going to give alternatives to people, whereas the compressed natural gas is a pretty small subset of vehicles that would help consumers that would have that capability there. Plus, of course, when there's no natural gas or methanol available, you could always use gasoline in what we're talking about. And finally, I would say, talking about support, and I guess you can hear in some of the other things that I've been talking about today, how you can help us is that, with that education, and we need that to translate into more co-sponsors in the Senate. We have a lot of interested offices, and we're making headway, but we need, in order to move our policy forward in the Senate, while we've been fairly successful in the House in terms of getting notable co-sponsors, have yet to break through on the next couple of co-sponsors in the Senate. That's going to allow us to have a hearing. This is referred to the Commerce Committee, and then we'll be prepared, we think, if we're able to get our ducks lined up there'll likely be a discussion on energy policy fairly soon here in the Senate. There's nothing that gets members of Congress more excited than high gas prices, or I should say their constituents yelling at them about high gas prices, and then they usually try and do something about it, and there'll be a lot of rhetoric, a lot of here or there. You see that this week. There's a fight over oil and gas subsidies versus how to spend that, and that's going to take all week. But it's just finger pointing. We think that if we can come along with a bipartisan solution that makes sense, it doesn't cost money, that pretty good case is just going to help consumers, maybe not immediately, but in the medium to long term, that we'll have a pretty good shot with your help. And I'll turn over to Neil. Thank you.
Thanks, Amit. As Amit said, here's a good example of bipartisanship is still alive. I think it's very safe to say that Senator Lugar and Senator Cantwell do not come from the same place on many, many issues, but we certainly do agree on this one. I apologize, I haven't been able to be with you all day. Have you discussed the open fuel standard and sort of what it does? And
Not in detail, and I think
Okay.
it would actually be really helpful for people, since you and Amit designed a pretty sophisticated bill,
Right.
to explain how it works with methanol.
oh dear. Could you do that?
I can do that, absolutely, but I'll do it then in the Q&A. then.
Okay, well, I don't want to bore people on that, but I generally find most things that I write, I don't want to bring Amit down with me, to be quite boring. So, but the essential message is, on the OFS, is that it is a requirement that cars in the United States operate on something other than just gasoline. It could be in a hybrid car, it could be an electric car, it could be a CNG car. What we expect is that it will be at first a flex fuel car, and then as soon as we have a mechanism in the bill that will bring certification by the EPA to be a more rounded flex fuel car to include all sorts of alcohols, including methanol. Those cars can still be operated on gasoline. That's sort of the point. But in whether it's a normal everyday life or a time of crisis, Americans with these vehicles would have a real choice. We have lots of bells and whistles in the bill to help reduce economic costs. So, for example, if you're a small car retailer, it wouldn't apply. We have a trading mechanism so that if, say, Ford can deploy and meet its target a year ahead of some other company, I won't name any names, they can trade credits, these sorts of things, to increase flexibility. It's maybe a little bit odd to have, at least odd on the face of it, to have a Republican like Senator Lugar leading this charge. Because it seems like we're telling markets what to do, it seems like we're telling consumers what to do, but and we like markets. And I mean, for that matter, we even like oil. I mean, it's not really an anti-oil thing. But the truth is that you can walk around any city in the United States and see that there isn't a free market in transportation. We're locked in by infrastructure. We're locked in essentially to a single fuel. The only real alternative out there right now is corn-based ethanol. In full disclosure, I have a corn farm in Iowa, so I actually like corn-based ethanol quite a lot. I think we should triple it, but we won't go there today. But within that locked-in system, there also are externality costs to that system that aren't captured even in high prices today. I know you all just had a former national security advisor, a former ambassador to the EU, among other things, a former deputy chief of naval operations. So you don't need to have me tell you about the corrosive national security costs of our current oil portfolio and dependence on regimes that, dependence on a global market controlled by regimes that don't wish us well. But it does bear underscoring that point that there's no more fundamental reason that Senator Lugar pursues this than what you see playing out with Iran today. It could be another country tomorrow. You see it time and again. I'm sure Senator Cantwell joins that sentiment. It's absurd that the greatest nation in the world has to go begging to Saudi Arabia to patch a market because Iran is threatening global oil supplies. I mean, that's an absurd situation that not only should we not tolerate, but we have the opportunity to do something about. And that, you know, you sort of, you hear that time and again, and so you might catch we get a little bit frustrated when instead of talking about policies like this, we sort of see the Senate floor and it's the same old rhetoric over and over again. But, you know, we can talk about how we're trying to change that. But it's not just the national security side, of course. It's also the economic costs. You know, we're spending about $1 billion a day on oil imports in this country. That's opportunity lost. That's opportunity lost to invest at home, to invest in, you know, could be shale gas, could be coal, could be biomass. All of those things will create jobs and economic development in our communities. And we're also spending a huge amount of money. I mean, just to keep supply lanes open, to keep our presence in the Middle East, to continue access to those oil reserves. Now, obviously, our commitments in a lot of these countries will continue regardless of our oil situation. However, can you imagine what will happen if Iran does close the Straits of Hormuz? I mean, we would have no choice but to respond instantly, because without that oil, our economy would, well, I mean, it would make the last 4 years look like a picnic. I mean, there's really no, there's no way to overstate that situation. So what the OFS does is trying to correct a very specific market failure. So that's what we do in government. In this case, we're trying to deal with that infrastructure problem. Now, when I say problem, again, that's not an anti-oil comment. That's not an anti-automotive comment. If anything, oil is too good and the cars we produce are too good, because, you know, oil, high-value product that's moving this country. That's a good thing. It will continue to be an important part of our system. The vehicles that we produce, you know, we produce them in Indiana. I mean, they're going to be on the road for decades. That's a good thing. But the problem is that every car that is sold in this in the U.S. that can only operate on gasoline is another car locking us into that cycle of dependence. Every car that rolls off the line is an opportunity lost if you want to produce those domestic sources of energy. You know, every car is locking a family or a small business into just gasoline. And that can be a real problem. Why? Because we face the very real possibility of a global shortage in oil. Not because we don't have enough, but because demand is skyrocketing around the world. You know, U.S. demand, you know, we're using less in this country. Some of that's because of the recession. Some of that's because of fuel economy standards, which Amit rightly pointed out were passed on a bipartisan basis, signed into law by President Bush. But look at the price out there. Consumption, we're not the price setters anymore. We know that. I mean, the price setters are primarily in Asia. So this situation is going to continue. Right now, there's only about 1.4 million barrels of spare capacity in the global oil system, which means that relatively small disruptions in South Sudan and Nigeria can send the price skyrocketing. So, you know, we have to, you know, it's hard. You don't want to be alarmist, but it's our responsibility in Congress to think about those what-if scenarios. So what if there is a shortage? Well, if there is, it's not going to matter that we have, you know, we've seen incremental improvements in alternative fuels, or that there are a few more flex fuel cars on the road, because the shock is going to be so great that that progress won't absorb the shock. So we need to actually act now, and that's essentially what we're doing through the OFS. More American families over a relatively short period of time, almost all American families, will have choice. And you know that you can't, it's very hard to put a value on that. But you know, we know it's probably about $100 a car, and that seems like a pretty good deal. So let me stop there, I guess, and thanks for having us and for your support.
Thank you. No, but before we kind of hop into the discussion part of this, in is Matt Brewster from EPA still here? I was struck by a very interesting point he brought up in his presentation, which is that if 50% of new cars, which is the first target in OFS, right? First target in OFS is 50% of new cars, was it by 2015, I think? 2015, need to be platforms on which fuels can compete, need to enable some sort of fuel competition. Automakers choose to do it any way you want, and by the time 2015 rolls along, your bill will already have done the methanol certification so that if it's flex fuel, it has to be gasoline, ethanol, methanol flexible. That's the way the bill is structured, right? Yeah. So what I was struck by is that he pointed out that, you know, that 50% really is a sweet spot, because while there's some 400 or 500 vehicle lines, with 50%, you're talking about certifying only 70 vehicle lines. And so that sounds really imminently doable, and it shouldn't be too much of a stumbling block. And I think it would be really great to have the automakers come to the table and kind of talk to you and say, you know what, if you move this a little bit left or right, or the year a little bit left or right, then we could work with this. But what I'd like to hear from you guys, and firstly, and also from you, Peter, you know, there are obviously a lot of natural gas folks represented in the room, and many methanol producers from all different feedstocks represented in the room. And I'd like to hear from you guys, and then from Peter, how can we get industry really engaged? Once industry understands this is in its own interest, how can we get industry engaged in saying OFS is something that would be a tremendous boon for us and for the American consumer and for the American economy writ large?
Go ahead.
Is this on? I think from my perspective, public education is really the most important thing. If we think about Hoosiers, which I think about a lot, as you can imagine, people know what today's flex fuel cars are. They see ethanol working in their community, and that's a very good thing. Without ethanol, gas prices would be much, much higher today. But when you start then talking about methanol, you start talking about different blends, there's going to be a lot of skepticism, there's going to be a lot of questions. It's perfectly understandable that people are skeptical of things that come out of Washington. So I think that public education component is really critical. And it's at the local level. It's you know, local newspapers, it's community organizations, it's working in the communities that all these companies operate in.
How big of a difference does it make to senators when they hear from companies that are employing folks in their district, or could potentially build a plant that would employ folks in their state, when they hear, you know what, this is something we want, this would really open up a market for us? How influential is that?
I mean, that's your number one way to get any senator's attention, is to talk about jobs in your state and, you know, what this could mean. But it can't be neutralized or offset by people saying the opposite, saying like this doesn't make sense, or, you know, this is going to cost too much, or things like that. Because when there's the conflict between two different interests that happen to be in your state, you know, you usually take the status quo route, unless, you know, there's a compelling reason. Otherwise, it can be a problem. So take this letter that I mentioned also had, besides the sort of the anti-corn lobby that had been established, it also had the American Petroleum Institute. Well, we know that there's even members of the U.S. Energy Security Council who, you know, are either part of that or used to be that. So that's something we have to, and the Chamber of Commerce. But, you know, so that's part of what I said in my remarks and what Neil said. It's about education. People just, if they only heard maybe from a certain group who said, hey, sign on to this letter, this is a big problem, they never heard the counter argument. So we need to be more diligent in getting that counter argument out there, because I think we're right on the facts. and we just have to get them out there.
So Peter, I mean, the natural gas industry obviously could really be a game changer here, both with its presence in organizations such as yours, and, you know, API, you're talking about oil and gas companies, and API, the upstream companies, Chamber, gas companies are an important part of that?
Well, to get to your question of how do you get the industry engaged, I think they're ready to be engaged. Industries are occasionally proactive. Sometimes they're reactive too, as they come to understand the priorities that Congress has. I think everybody understands that we're in, you know, the sort of the major election cycle now, and so certainly no energy legislation is, I don't know of anybody that thinks any significant energy legislation will move before the end of this Congress. Depending upon what happens in the election, both in the Congress and in the White House, perhaps even independent of that, you know, my sense is we get a major energy bill every 3 to 5 to 7 years, and that there's a fair amount of steam building up in the system. You know, if there is a new president, or if there is President Obama is reelected and doesn't have to worry about election again, it changes the dynamics significantly, so that an awful lot of the people that we talk to think there could be a genuine opportunity for a significant energy bill to be considered early in the next Congress. And if something like the open fuel standard were seen as a possibility for inclusion in an energy bill like that, I can promise you my members would care and pay attention. ANGA was designed principally to help increase demand for natural gas. I think for the most part we're agnostic about how that natural gas is used, whether it's used to power NGV vehicles or whether it's used to produce methanol to power alternatively fueled vehicles. So there's no, we have not taken an official position on the Open Fuel Standard Act, in part because we have, other fish to fry. There's an awful lot going on, as you know, that's controversial about natural gas, and so we tend to focus on those rather than important but to us ancillary issues right now.
Vic, I can see you want to jump in, and as part of your comments, why don't you also talk about the pricing for making methanol out of different commodities, the cost? I think that would be interesting for people.
Okay. Well, the comment I was going to make is that one small unfortunate fact is that shale gas producers, by and large, are relatively small and not vertically integrated, which means they don't have core competencies in the downstream, we call it. Okay, so they don't instinctively understand what's the best product made out of it. So so that's one point. So they may naturally gravitate to, for example, let's have somebody make LNG and ship it out. That's a very bad idea, by the way. I personally think that exporting LNG is a bad idea. I think I would rather much export what I call value-added products that create jobs here, like urea or like methanol for that matter. Okay, now what was your other question on cost?
I know you wanted to talk about making methanol from other feedstocks.
Oh, yeah.
You did some cost estimates?
Yeah, I didn't put it on the slide because I made the slide last week, but you could put on it what would it be with coal, for example. What would it be with biomass? With coal, for this country, I would say that the best thing to do is low-grade coal. Coal that is not easily used for power, certainly not used for coking, certainly not used for steel and other important, and which is very cheap. So low-grade coal, which means like lignite, is so much water in it, you don't want to transport it all around. So typically what you would do is a mine-mouth methanol plant would make a lot of sense. That sort of coal will probably cost about $25 a metric ton, okay, compared to bituminous coal, which is 100 plus and goes to 200 when somebody shakes something. Not probably 200, maybe 150. And so making it with lignite, I came up with roughly the same as $8 per million BTU on the gas, so if you remember that. So it's competitive with lignite at the higher end of the natural gas scale. One of the things that concerns me about natural gas, I'll tell you flat out, is that it's going to hold back certain things. Because it's going to be so cheap and so easy to do that it's going to hold back other renewables, and it's going to hold back other ways of doing stuff which will reduce choice. Very quickly, natural gas could become your dominating commodity for some of your chemicals, which would be a bit unfortunate. And then biomass. Biomass can very easily be converted to syngas, and from that it becomes methanol. But biomass has such low energy density that, again, you want to do it at the mouth of wherever it is. And it is feasible, but it'll be higher cost today than any of the other two I mentioned.
Right, and you could also potentially mix coal and biomass together.
See, she knows something. She's just asking.
No, if you're looking at the GHG profile, you could mix coal and biomass together to kind of neutralize the
well, in fact, you almost have to. If you're going to biomass by itself, it doesn't gasify that easily. You would like to blend in a little bit of coal in order to be able to gasify it more readily. Yes, there are some of these things we know to do, but even when you do that, it is going to be more expensive than natural gas today, especially today. That was a ridiculous price you saw there, 37 cents. You know?
Yes.
So low gas prices are going to seduce us, but then when demand comes, it'll rise up. And I really expect that to be between $4 and $6.50.
I think about it this way. It costs a heck of a lot more to convert Canadian tar sands into oil than to lift a barrel in Saudi Arabia. As long as the price is where both of these are economic, you're going to do both of these. So as long as the price is where making methanol from biomass is economic, even though that may be more expensive than making methanol from natural gas, you're still going to do it. It's just a function of where the price is.
Absolutely, because there's a question of biomass of convenience, I call it, okay? Take, for example, solar is not, if you want to use grid parity of solar, go ahead and use it. But if you use solar for the 1.2 billion people who have no electricity and no grid lines, what's grid parity mean? So you may find pockets of biomass that is perfectly okay to make methanol with, and then you go ahead and use it wherever you are. Yes.
Now, Gal, I know you wanted to jump in.
Just one word about industry, how to get industry support. First of all, it took, I think, between 4 and 5 years to convince the utility industry to support electric vehicles. Something that is so intuitive. I mean, why wouldn't utilities support electric vehicles that create demand for electricity? That's about how long it takes for industry to really come around an idea that is actually works in its own best interest. So I'm hoping that when it comes to natural gas, it won't take that long. But industry, sometimes it's slow to respond, and it takes time to coalesce the industry. But certainly there is a clear case here. I think that when we talk politically, we have to think about the time in which we live. Any legislation that will help move natural gas into the transportation sector, I think needs to have 3 attributes. One is it has to be fiscally conservative, because we live in a fiscally conservative era. There's no money. 2, it has to be fuel neutral. It has to be not only natural gas, but to open the door to a variety of feedstocks, and we talked about this, natural gas being one of them, but not the only one. 3rd, we don't have today policy that addresses the light-duty vehicle fleet. And this is it's ordinary Americans that are crying, complaining about high gas prices. They're not the ones driving the heavy-duty trucks. And even if you look at President Obama's budget proposal, they had some provisions for natural gas, but it was all about heavy duty. I think if a policy needs to get substantial public support, it has to give something for the light-duty vehicle fleet, which happens to be most of the cars that are on our fleet. And I think if you have all 3 of those, then you can have a policy that could get broad bipartisan support.
And of course, the OFS is a no subsidy bill, right? Right? No subsidies. No. Okay, so we have very little time. I see a lot of questions. So what we're going to do is something a little bit different. No comments, questions only, and we're going to do a lightning round. Lightning round, 4 questions. You ask your question. You guys don't answer it. And we'll let our panelists each make concluding remarks quickly in response to the question. So Mark, let's start with you, then over here, then over here, then over here. Go ahead. Wait for the, yeah, and then identify yourself.
Mark Rosenblatt. So after listening to this all day so far, it's hard for me to understand why one wouldn't support the open fuel standard. So the question is really around, the America's Natural Gas Alliance. If this standard triples or quadruples your available market, why wouldn't the gas guys want to support it? And if they don't, then there's something we're missing today, and we need to know what it is.
Ask all at once?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Steve Hansen with Raymond James. I just wanted to make one question. One is that everyone's talking about like there's heaps of excess lack of methanol capacity available today, which there's not globally. And in the U.S., there's very little capacity at all, although there's some companies starting up new. So it's $1 billion in roughly 4 years to build a new methanol plant, of which you're going to need a lot if you're planning on getting to any scale, which you're talking about here. So I guess my question is at what point do the legislative bodies and different associations start conversing with the methanol industry and planning together to try and make this happen? Because you're talking 5 to 10 years lead time to get any real scale up to support what you're all talking about.
And where was the other question? Over here?
Boyd and Gray said the EPA is a chief block to new fuels. And it looks to me as if the Senate bill gives the EPA a lot of discretion to get in the way of accomplishing the goal. Why do you not favor the House bill?
And I think we had just one more right here, and then we'll go to our panel. That's it? Okay. There's Mike, just quickly there.
If natural gas costs only about $1, why is it necessarily a forecast of say 4 to 8? Why is there not a wide range anywhere above $1? And also, if we were to switch to methanol for transportation, we have a 100-year supply at the rate we're going to use it without transportation. Could that not cut our natural gas reserves to 30 years?
Okay, a lot of stuff in the Q&A. So guys, lightning round. Amit, we start with you.
You want me to answer all 4 of those?
Answer whatever you want, but make it quick.
Well, I'll leave the first one to our natural gas friends. The second one was the plan with working with the methanol industry on the plants. Well, you guys, probably people in the audience know a lot better than me, but I understand there is some additional excess capacity in the market right now that could be taken up in the first couple of years. And then, as you see from our bill in general, this is a chicken and egg problem bill that we're trying to solve. We don't get into the infrastructure part. There are costs to convert our fueling infrastructure, our dispensing infrastructure too. We don't deal with that. We think if we take care of this part of the three-legged stool, that the market will come to that, because that's what consumers will want. In terms of EPA, the way we structured our bill relative to the House, we think is quite important in terms of debunking some of the myths out there relative to the automakers say, we can't make a tri-fuel flexible vehicle. It's just impossible. Some people think there's environmental concern. We say, okay, let's put that on the table. We'll make the certification process. We'll have a process to prove out that these are possible, and that will, everybody will have their say in a public order, and then we're confident that the Transportation Department and EPA will say that this is possible, and then we can get that off the table. So we can't. It's almost a rebuttal to those arguments that some people try and put up to block us. And what was the last one? Natural gas is only $1? I'll let someone else answer that. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll answer only 2 questions. One is on the plants. Yes, I think there is some capacity that was mothballed before that will now get regenerated. Many companies have stated they're going to actually bring entire plants back from elsewhere. But the key point is this: as long as people believe that there's going to be stable, low pricing, they will come. You build it, they will come. Okay, this is the entire chemical. This is methanol. This is urea. This is just about name it. Okay, so So I don't, and that, by the way, it's not about $1 billion. With newer technology, it's closer to 800 million, but who's going to argue, okay? This is for a 5 metric ton a day plant. This is what you're talking about. So I'm fairly bullish on the fact that if you can predictably say it's going to be low price, then they will come. Now, on the price, I hope I did not say $1. I hope I said $1 for the methanol. Natural gas, I hope I said, would be between $4 and $6.50 per million BTU, which is same as 1,000 cubic feet. Now, the reason, well, the quick reason for that is the model basically goes like this. If the price goes up, you can, from the day you want to produce gas, you can start it and 21 days later you have gas. This is what's different about shale gas. Offshore gas, 4 years later you get it. Okay, now I say 21 days just to be hyperbolic. Okay, in point of fact, by the time you get to the market, it's probably closer to 90 days or 180 days. But geez, you got a 3-month strip saying it's going up, you start drilling. So this is what's going to keep the ceiling. Okay, the floor is entirely determined by demand, which is why right now the floor is below what I would consider the floor. So that is the basis for saying it'll be in a tight band. And once, let me tell you one thing investors like. It is certainty. When there's uncertainty, the discount rate goes up. So certainty will drive behavior, and certainty of 4 to 6.5, maybe 8, will drive industry back, including your methanol producer.
Neil, you want to pop in?
I think my colleagues here have answered. I'll add just one small thing to the EPA question. I certainly don't put a lot of trust in a lot of EPA's regulations. Other things they do quite well. So I don't see us as giving EPA any sort of veto over the policy in the bill. I think Amit is right that we're willing to put these ideas to the test. You don't get a lot of humility in Washington and not in Congress, but you don't want Amit and I or anyone else in Congress at the staff level or at the member level saying the way things should be. We've put out a general policy and are making some claims in it, and we're willing to let that be tested.
All right, Peter and Gal.
Mark, if the question about the Open Fuel Standard Act, it's not an issue of ANGA not supporting it, and I suspect that if the bill came up as a standalone bill and it were the only energy-related piece of legislation, that the industry probably would support it. But that's not typically the way energy legislation moves, and I don't expect to see that happen. But I don't want to suggest that the natural gas industry wouldn't support the Open Fuel Standard Act if that became a live option before the Congress.